Chat GPT. We're living in a really interesting time when it comes to technology. Chat GPT in particular is one that in the world of D&D has eaten up a lot of conversations. Many of the different Discord servers that I hang out on, including my own, the Sly Flourish Discord server, which you can join by becoming a patron of Sly Flourish, has a dedicated sort of Chat GPT or AI-based forum where people talk about how they're using these things to run their games. I'm going to give a disclaimer, which is I'm not going to talk about some of the larger society or moral issues that are going on with AI. I've talked about it a little bit in previous shows. It's really not my place to make a decision about whether you feel that these tools are good or bad for society or anything like that. I will say that there are certain ways that these tools could be used that could be very, very bad, and very bad for us, very bad for publishers and producers, very bad for artists, and very bad for everybody that's using them. And then there are ways that I feel like, yeah, that doesn't seem so bad, but they could still have an impact that we're not seeing. So I reserve my right to change my mind. That's one thing I'm going to say, that we are looking at this technology right now as what's going on. And B, there definitely could be major issues that are going on with society and how these things are growing and what they're doing, how they're displacing jobs, how they're changing the economy. Maybe they're good, maybe they're bad. We don't know yet. So I'm not going to be talking about those topics. Instead, I'm going to be focusing on talking about ChatGPT in the world of prep for RPGs. So not publishing products that are getting sold, not in larger issues, but specifically towards GMs, you and me, using these things to prep their games. One of the big questions I had was like, well, how are people using it? Because I've been using it. I've been using it a lot. I've been using it for lots of different things. I found it to be really interesting and good for some things. I found it to be really terrible at other things. I found things that I was like, wow, it's really good at this. And I realized, oh, wait, I already can do that with other things, right? So there's definitely been different sort of ways that I've been looking at it. And I still don't know that we really understand it. I don't understand. I know I can speak for myself. I know that I don't really understand it. I really don't know how it works well, how it works poorly, how we can tell the difference, and what other things we could be using instead. There's all these sort of questions that I've got about it. I'm spending a lot of time with it to try to understand. There are definitely things where I use it, I'm like, oh, that was definitely valuable. So what I did is I said, okay, let me go out on YouTube and I'll put up a post and I'll say, how are you using it? And there is a post with a bunch of responses. I'm linking to that in the show notes below. 73 people came back and talk about how they've gotten use from ChatGPT, what specific ways that they've used it. They came up with some really interesting ones. One person here talks about a thing called Private GPT. I actually tried it. It's an open source version of ChatGPT that you can download to your local machine, so it's not reaching out to some crazy system and sharing all your information, but you can use it on local stuff. I tried it out. It worked okay. There's parts of it that I think could be really useful, but didn't quite work yet. But we're really early in this technology. I think we're going to see some things. I hope we're going to see some things that could be really cool. Things that aren't necessarily part of, supporting some major and shitified company, but instead are focused on helping us do some really interesting things. So lots of responses. I would recommend, if you're interested in this, take a look at the responses. But one of the things I did, because I'm a busy guy, I pasted it into ChatGPT and I said, hey, tell me what you found. And it said, based on the comments, here are 10 common ways people are using ChatGPT for role-playing games. 1, they're generating character descriptions, backstories, and names. 2, creating dialogue for NPCs and cultures. 3, generating descriptions for environments, scenes, and settings. 4, designing quests, plotlines, and story arcs. 5, developing ideas for magic items, artifacts, and treasure. 6, creating handouts, letter, and documents for players. 7, brainstorming and generating ideas for NPCs, organizations, and factions. 8, creating random tables for scenario generation and encounter design. 9, assisting with rules lookup and providing information from rule books. And 10, using it as a tool for inspiration, brainstorming, and creative collaboration. So I thought those were very interesting. And I have used these and tried many of these things. One big question that I have, and I think get into some of these here, is where is it actually better than a random generator? So, for example, I have been working on a Lazy GM's random generator for a while now. This is available to patrons of Sly Flourish. They get access to it. They get access to all the updates. And I regularly use it myself, and I update it myself for my own games and then make it available to others. But I have a bunch of different things that you can generate. You can generate a monument. So you have like an ethereal obsidian obelisk, or a glyphed ancient mosaic, a cyclopean fairy gravestone, a ruined bladed geode. Right? Those are like monuments, things that you would find in the middle of a location. But then I can also add in things like Midgard. And I can say an astral unearthed pool of the goat of the woods, queen of decadence, or a crumbling floating sigil of Volund, the crossroad master of fire and the anvil. So I can tie in lore from specific things. One of the ones I added yesterday, because I've been playing a lot of Diablo, was a Diablo-style dungeon, a wraith-touched workshop of Typhon, and again, it's Midgard flavored, the spectral armory of Hulda, the elven goddess of hearth and seasons, the nightmare-ridden observatory of Bethal, the exiled lord, right? That's really cool. This is just random generator. It's just a list of stuff mixed with another list of stuff, mixed with another list of stuff. There's no AI in here. I paste a bunch of things in there and it generates them. So the question is like, is the stuff that's coming out of Chat GPT better than that? Why don't we try it? So here we have Chat GPT 4, and I'm going to say, give me 10 Diablo style dungeons that are flavored with the gods of Kobold Press's Midgard setting. Right? And it comes up with the one, the Carnal Crypt of Marina, a haunting. And so it actually gives like a little bit like haunting undead crypt located deep within a winter forest filled with traps and puzzles to test the intruders. The Blood Furnace of Chernobog, the Temple of Time of Rava, the Labyrinth of Velis. These are pretty good, right? This isn't a bad way to go. And unlike mine, it actually has some kind of more descriptions about what's going on there. I look at this and is it better? Yeah, it's not bad. Is it, how much better is it? I don't know that it's completely blowing my socks off. One of the things that I think it might be doing a better job at is making sure that they make sense. So just looking at these, again, I'm running these right as we're talking. I've never run these before. I didn't even run this prompt before. The Stormshroud Spire of Perun, a towering storm-racked spire situated on a floating island, is home to various air elementals. Adventurers must withstand the challenges. I don't know that Perun is an air elemental god. I'm not sure. So not bad, right? It kind of comes up with it. But is it really better than than the random generator? I don't know. It's not terrible. One of the things that's interesting about how ChatGPT does what it does, though, is an argument about like what ChatGPT is. If you kind of nail it down, is that it's a fancy version of autocorrect. We're oversimplifying. I know. If you're an AI PhD, don't yell at me. But like, it's kind of like the way that autocorrect works. It's keeping track of the words that were said before and asking itself the probability of what words comes next. And it's kind of extending that out over long words and sentences and even paragraphs and stuff like that. So the way that works is it's looking for the probabilities of both. It's doing a little bit of stochastic stuff where it rolls and sometimes it picks stuff that isn't necessarily the most common, but it's definitely working on like a bell curve, which means that when you generally ask it for stuff, it's often going to come back with general answers, and it's often going to come up with answers that are relatively common. Where a random generator, particularly like the random generator I was just using here, it's flat. The curve is flat. Like the Wraith Touch Workshop is just as likely as Spectral Armory of Hulda. That it's you can weight it in perchance. You can say like this option is more likely than another option to take place. But I don't for a lot of those, which means you're going to come up with wilder, more wacky stuff from a random generator, some of which may just simply not work at all. It just doesn't make sense. Many of these, I'm sure, don't make sense. But then sometimes it's that outer edge of the bell curve. It's the stuff that isn't at the very end where that just doesn't make sense at either way, but just inside where you're like, wow, that's wacky enough that I can make it work. Where the most common one isn't. An example of something where ChatGPT didn't do that particularly good job is I asked it to run a D&D game for me. It was kind of neat. It would answer questions and stuff like that. But I told it I was on the planet of Tarrasques, right? I'm a 20th level fighter that's fighting for survival on the planet of Tarrasques. And it kept throwing like rats at me and giant spiders and goblins and common D&D monsters. And I was like, you don't understand. I'm in this high fantasy place. And maybe my prompts weren't right, but I felt like it went to the most common stuff because that's how it understands the world. It's not trying to give you wild, wacky answers or else every answer would be completely bananas. Instead, it's trying to give you stuff that it thinks makes sense, which in some sense means it's boring. So that to me is a big question. And when you look at things like generating character descriptions, backstories, and names, the question is it really offering an advantage in those things over just regular random tools? And maybe it's okay if it doesn't. Like it, right now, because it hasn't been completely enshittified yet, it's free. So we can try it out. I'm actually paying for the ChatGPT 4 version. So it's not free to me right now. because I'm experimenting with it and doing a lot of stuff and I want more prompts and yada, yada, yada. But we know that this is going to get kind of brought into other tools. Now, my hope is that the technology of it, the idea of LLMs, and many of the LLM models are free and open source. So I'm hoping that we will see more free, open source, dedicated tools that we can use to kind of focus on the things that we want. One of these I found that is really useful, and that's the handouts and letters and documents for players. One of the things where you're not going to get a random generator to be able to do this for you, and you're also not likely to want to do it on your own, is an example of write an epic poem. So you could actually say hey, the characters are exploring this tomb, and I want to put on the tomb wall a poem about this particular god. Here are some things about the god. Give me a 4-stanza poem. And it will come back with a poem that's probably pretty good. You may want to edit it a little bit. You probably want to make sure it's okay. But I bet you it's better than you could sit down there and noodle through. Now, in some cases, you might want to noodle through your own epic poem. An example is you could also have it write a letter between villains, one villain to another, that's actually intelligence that the characters are going to pick up, that's going to help them in their game. And you might be tempted to say, well, I'll let Chat GPT write the letter. But in that case, because writing the letter might actually be good game prep for you, it might be better for you to actually write the letter. But I'm not a poet, and I can't write a poet. One time we had a situation we had in my last Scarlet Citadel game is they were facing these creatures called the Fate Eaters. And the Fate Eaters were these worm-like creatures that love to suck the memories out of your brain and listen to your dreams and hear your psychic calls. And one of the players said, wouldn't it be funny? I think she put up a prompt that was, give me a song sung by the Fate Eaters, these worm-like creatures that devour the memories of creatures in our D&D game, but sung to the tune of Every Breath You Take by Sting. And she pasted in a chat, and it was hysterical. And I said, all throughout the night while you guys are sleeping, you hear that song in your mind, the song of the Fate Eaters. And it was this really hysterical song. You can't just whip that thing up in your prep. So there's areas where a tool like ChatGPT can make something for you that you just can't make with anything else. That idea of songs, poems, letters that aren't really that important. If you just want to put a little bit of lore, 2 or 3 sentences about something that you want to generate, and you don't really want to spend the time to do it yourself, it's maybe not that important that it's exactly right, but it might be something fun to do. I think ChatGPT is perfect for that. So those are a couple things that have been kind of on my mind about ChatGPT. Is it better than a random table? Where does it really serve? So what are the things that it's really bad at? It's really bad at facts. It's really bad with math. One of the things I've been shocked by is how bad it is at math. Now, there are plugins for it. One of the plugins is Wolfram Alpha. So now if you ask it some mathematical questions, it will actually paste it to a different service, which then responds with actual mathematical answers. But we don't have to usually do a lot of math in our ChatGPT program when it comes to RPG prep. So that's not really a big deal. But there might be circumstances where you ask for facts about a game world, or you ask for facts about some kind of lore, or somebody brought up, I think one of the things here is looking up rules. I'm not convinced that you wouldn't want to go look up the rule yourself anyway. One of the problems with ChatGPT is when you're asking it about facts, and these could even be fictional facts, is it's only helpful if you really don't care if it's right. If it's wrong and you needed it to be right, then you can't check it, right? Or you're going to have to go check it. And if you're going to have to check it, why did you even ask it in the first place? So one of the things is if I'm asking it for truth, for things about Midgard, maybe it's right. So an example, we'll go back to our thing here, and I'll say, give me the name of the gods of the Southlands in Kobold Press's Midgard setting. Right? So, and it gives up the whole disclaimer, hey, what do I know about the thing? And it gives me these gods. Yeah, Aten, Anu Akma, Thoth Hermes, Bestet, Horus, Isis, Nikishi, Ptah, Set. Right? So it gave me 9. I know there are more than 9. And if I actually pull up the Southlands guidebook, I will find more than 9. Now, of course, it only knows what it knows and it doesn't know what it doesn't know. But my point is maybe that's enough. And maybe I can look through that. If I didn't need to have a complete perfect list of the gods, maybe that's enough. Now, something else is I've seen when I've asked it for things like, give me the gods of the North in the Midgard setting, it starts to throw a bunch of Norse gods in there, which is correct because the Norse gods are in Midgard. But then it starts adding other Norse gods that aren't in Midgard. And maybe that still works out and it doesn't matter and I can still use it, but it's not exactly factually correct. So that question of if you need it to be right, you're in trouble. If you don't care if it's right, you don't mind that it misses something or it adds something you didn't really miss, then it's probably fine. If you're hanging on with a loose grip, like if I want to have just these gods of the Southlands, it's good. But what about give me 10 evil gods of Midgard's Southlands D&D setting, right? And, here I think it might start making some up. Let's find out. So it has Set, Apep, the World Serpent, Nebtheth. I haven't never seen Nebtheth, right? Sekhmet, Mistress of Dread. It's kind of cool. War and Disease. So in this case, it's getting close to starting to make stuff up. And maybe this is enough that I can grab one of these and go, and I don't really care. It's about how much do I mind diverging from what the actual Southlands book says. Now, this is another example of wow, this is really neat that it's able to know all this stuff. You know what else knows this stuff? The PDF of Southlands. I can't just go into the Southlands book. Why don't we do that for funsies? I can't go into the Southlands book itself. I can go down to the gods of the Southlands and I can go look them up myself, right? I can see all of the gods. I've got pictures of the gods. I've got their domains. I've got all this stuff. So is it really helping me that much if I can just read it or search on the PDF itself? I don't know. And honestly, I've some of the things I'm talking about right now, I've actually experimented with. And the answer was, it's actually just easier for me to use the PDF in a lot of circumstances. I sort of wasted my time trying to get Chat GPT to understand the exact questions I was asking for, when really I could have just spent the time on a couch with some music and read the PDF and written some notes down. So it's interesting about where is it going to be useful? And it's bad at facts. Now there is one area where I think it could really be cool. And I've experimented with this a little bit. And that is when you can get it to read PDFs for you. And this is one where I think a local tool will be better at this. And the idea that if you put a PDF into a language model like this and it can read it, it could then sit there as sort of a co-GM with you and answer questions about the setting for you. That could be really kind of cool. I uploaded Ruins of the Grendelroot, my book of adventures, and I fed it to a plugin for ChatGPT called AI PDF. And the idea here is you can tell it, hey, here's a PDF, I want you to read it. And then use the rest of the language model that you understand in order to answer questions from this specific PDF. So I gave it Ruins of the Grendelroot, and it gave me a summary of the book and told me what was there. And I said stuff like, what's the seventh adventure in the book about? And it said, the seventh adventure is Children of the Red Rose. So it said, oh yeah, the seventh adventure is Children of the Red Rose. Wrong. It's actually the ninth the ninth adventure in the book. So again, bad at facts. But it did describe the Children of the Red Rose pretty correctly when it asked about what that adventure is about. It had it good. And I said, give me 5 bullet points on the history of the cavern of Deep Delver's Enclave. And it gave me history of Deep Delver's Enclave itself. But still, these were correct. And then I said, what about the cavern around the enclave? What happened there? And that's where it started getting into general history, but it responded with the general history. And then I said okay, well, who runs Shadowreach? Because it mentioned the city of Shadowreach establishment. And it said, Shadowreach is ruled by a cabal of 9 powerful wizards and the archmages. And here's the history. And then, so it actually knew and understood. Now, this is pretty early. I think as this stuff gets better, it's going to be really good. And that idea of you can take a large language model, you can feed it a PDF, and then you can ask it natural language questions and get natural language responses. If that works well, I think that could be a real killer app for this. I think that's something that I would definitely love. I would love to be able to take a source book, read it, kind of get my own piece, but then feed it in a model and then have this thing I could ask questions to and get responses back from. Might be easier than just picking up the book and reading it. But again, you always have that question, am I better just looking it up in the book? That's a good question. But I think that could be really something pretty neat. So what is this thing? There was an article recently about somebody, a doctor who started using ChatGPT in order to have better conversations, more human conversations with patients and with the families of patients who were very stressed out and having things going. And he would put in his diagnosis into ChatGPT. He would tell it how he wanted it to respond to the patient, and then it would come up with the output. He would then read it and try to get the other things and then talk to them using it sort of as a script to talk to patients. And he said, and it did a really good job at that. It gave him ideas about how to better communicate to people that are under these big stressful things and he was typically thinking about. But he said when it came to the discussions of the details of what was going on, it was about as trustworthy as a hungover intern. that you're a hungover resident in his case. That like the idea was it's not giving great facts. And that idea of like treat it like a high schooler. No offense to our high school listeners here. But like when it comes to like how much accuracy, how much faith you want to give it, treat it as though you handed a copy of Ruins of the Grendel Route to a high schooler and they read it, and then you're going to ask questions to them about it. That's about how good the accuracy is going to be on the other side. If that's enough and that works for you, then maybe that's enough and it's worthwhile. But if you're looking for a level of depth that you don't have, then maybe it's not really a tool. So I think we are still at the very early stages of understanding exactly what these large language models and tools like Chat GPT can do for RPG prep. We're all experimenting with them. In many cases, we're seeing things that are really pretty wild, like the fact that it's able to talk to us in natural language is really good, but it's really more of a parrot than it is actual AI. It's not actually learning because it's already trained on its model. It's not really doing the things we think it does. It's not a thinking machine. It's not sentient. It's basically has a nice way of taking essentially the kinds of things you find in search and wrapping them up in text that sounds like a human being is picking it up. So it's pretty interesting. It's interesting stuff. I'm still using it a lot. I'll tell you, so a couple of things that it's been helping me with that I like is there's a plugin where I can feed it a YouTube video and it will give me a summary of what that YouTube video was about. I like that. Now, it might skip over some of the interesting parts. Like I had it do a summary of a video that the Wizards of the Coast team had put out, and it summarized the video correctly, but it missed one of the most interesting things that was actually in that video, the thing that we actually all wanted to talk about. It didn't pick up on that because it doesn't know that that was interesting. It's like, hey, this is a summary. So if you really don't care and you're not that particular about wanting to know every interesting thing that was in a video, but you're like, hey, what is that video about? You can feed that video in and it will tell you what the video was about. I really think that is a powerful tool. That's in many cases, if it's like a 30-minute video, but I really don't want to watch 30 minutes, it's way easier for me to pass a video to this. It reads the closed caption summary and it picks it up. I think the PDF plugin could also be really cool. I would really love to have like, there's some times where people are a little bit wordy on their blogs. I don't know. I'm not typically wordy, but some people are. And I would just want to just tell me what this is about. Tell me what the 5 main points are. And if I'm not going to read the article anyway, I might as well at least get that. If it's something where I would be better reading the article or I don't want to miss anything, well, then I better just read the article. But in many cases, if I'm just surfing through something, a 150 word summary of a 3,000 word blog article may be a better way for me to go. It's better than not reading at all in some circumstances. So I'll be very interested to see like how this thing gets sort of wired into the tools that we use. Because right now, like on my phone, if I'm reading an article on Feedly, I would love to have like one button that just says summarize this for me. And it could just summarize what's already there. Instead, I have to do a bunch of copying and pasting and stuff like that. There's a bunch of like mechanics that are going on with this that I have to screw around with in order to get it to work right, where I think like once they streamline some of that, it's going to be pretty amazing. So I'm bullish on it. It's pretty interesting. I think that the questions are like, for DMs, is it really better than a random generator, or is it really better than just reading the PDF? I think in some circumstances it certainly is. If it's saving you time, it's saving you time. If it's not, then always ask yourself, like, am I better just reading the original material? Know that you can't trust it, right? You can't trust the output. If you're asking a rules question, that doesn't mean it's correct. And if you don't mind like the summarization that it does, if you don't mind it missing things, it's probably just fine. So that is my thoughts on ChatGPT and how it works with RPG prep. If you enjoyed this show, you can get more stuff like this by subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is absolutely free to sign up. You get a free adventure generator PDF sent directly to your email inbox, as well as a weekly RPG email as well. You can also support me directly on Patreon. You get access to the Patron Q&A, the Uncovered Secrets Volume 1 and 2, the City of Arches sourcebook, and a whole bunch of other exclusive material. It's very cheap to subscribe, and it helps me put on shows like this. And you can pick up any of my books, including Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, The Lazy DM's Companion, and The Lazy DM's Workbook at the Sly Flourish bookstore. Links for all of those are in the show notes below. Thank you all very much. Have a great day and get out there and play an RPG.